Professor Howard Williams brings you death and memory from the past and the present. It's Archaeodeath.
Archaeodeathlings, we're back with the third video in a series reflecting my WordPress blog posts on the Archaeology of Andor Series 2. And in this post, I complement the previous discussions of the Archaeology of Coruscant and Chandrila, which are counterpoints to each other in showing the archaeology of the Empire's hub with the tensions and the growing resistance of the Ghorman front led by Elector Caro Rylance on Ghorman, a planet which has a landscape, material culture and architecture that frame the way in which we are intended to understand and experience the plight of the Ghorman in relation to Earth history, into our history. So the archaeology mediates our senses of particularly European pasts with the sense of a fictional science fiction scenario. And it's important to go through the many ways in which this sense of the historical past, of pastness, is constructed through the newsreel footage, which is seen by the discrete group of ISB and other Imperial officers who are let know the plan to dominate and extract calcite mineral that coats the reactor lenses for the Death Star that's being made in secret, and how they're going to overcome this rich and proud culture which has strength in its galactic-wide trade in textiles but a weakness in its reliability on that said single product. It's famed across the galaxy for the elegance and durability, the versatility of the textiles produced in all weights and weaves, and this is seen as a blessing and their curse. And so on the Malthine Divide, via a sort of 1940s 50s newsreel style display, we're introduced to Ghorman culture with the idea of a Ghorman horn, which is a kind of horn bagpipe played here by a man dressed in sort of almost alpine gear. And this is reflecting the broader representation of the Ghorman as Southern French or Swiss, Tyrolean, perhaps North Italian. There's a mixture of European aesthetics that go into this representation to show the Ghorman as a proud people. They are a white European people, and they are seen as industrious, hard-working, and but finely dressed in an aesthetic that mixes 19th century with interwar Europe. So they fit the role of the cliche of the French resistance, but also into a dominated by the Nazis, I should obviously make clear, but they also fit into a broader range of European aesthetics. So we have the Alpine style clothing and the Ghorman Valley horn, giving us that sense of deep time tradition, culture, alpine environments with deep valleys where the various what's called webberies are established. And this is a later aerial view of Andor and Wilmon flying over the webberies, and the idea is that these are in tight valleys. This is the primary production place for the Ghorman twill, produced by a large arachnid called the Gorlectopods, and these are producing the Ghorman twill in these webberies. So it's totally sci-fi, but it does draw on this very important aesthetic of it being a benign but mountainous world with these deep valleys, and they're served where over 40 billion galactopods spinning the fibre from which 60 million bolts of Ghorman twill are made in one season alone, we're told in the newsreel. So pride in their work is the defining characteristic, and the smartness of their material culture, builtness and built environment and landscape is connected to this production and the labour. They're oblivious to the intent of the empire, who want to deep mine, and so you get this sense of a people who are working within a global system. They are both beneficiaries and they serve the broader trade networks that were inherited from before the empire. And we see them in the newsreel from the Malthine Divide with the Weberies and the textile production mills. So we get this sense of a broader landscape before we're introduced to Palmo, the capital city, where there is again an aesthetic of a historic mural identity emphasized, with a contrast between the brutalist modernist architecture of the empire and their headquarters and the more recent modernity of the Ghorman architecture. And here we see views from later on with the security tower, or the armory, as it's really dominating, intimidating, provoking the historic landscape of Palmo by the empire. The architecture of the empire here is a deliberate act of aggression that is to stoke and foster the resentment. And the historic city. Now, the historic city is we have at the core we have the modernist Ghorman architecture that seems up to date. It seems modernist. It seems 20th, 21st century, but in a sci-fi world. And around it you see domes and townhouses, implying a European 19th century. They're like the as well as the Parisian houseman style aesthetic of the houses, you've also got the Baroque towers. I mean, we don't know whether they're churches or temples. We hear that Chub is one of the deities worshipped, but we get the sense of a civic architecture of late modern Central Europe. And if I just skip back, you can also see the concentric walls, angular walls, which do sort of evoke the architectures of forts and cities and towns built against a cannon, particularly in the 17th and 18th century. So they here, though, they contain canals, and this is never really explained. Is this because of internal conflict on Ghorman, or is it there to defend against the Gorlectopods before they were domesticated, to keep big bugs away? We never get that sense, but you see it's a bay on the sea with a mouth of a river, various landing ports for ships and for spacecraft, and you get a sense of historic mural defences, the details and the use of the canals of which is never fully explained, and so you have a multiple layers of architecture implying a story that is never fully told. And I think that's the way in which this world building is richly created within the city walls themselves. So you have this mixture of different ages, antiquities. So you see more sort of Baroque and Italianate designs in the backdrop, and then a more angular, what we would call 20th century concrete designs in the foreground, blurring together. We have the House of Rylance, which is one of the the Tuileries that produces sort of fine quality textiles, and you see the way their sophisticated dress, foreign clients, intergalactic clients, that sense of trade, of commerce built on production. And the theme of the Gorlectopods and a vintage aesthetic from Europe is again represented in the cafe/bar, where you see the lavish Gorlectopod motifs above the windows. It clearly is intended to be alien. It's not evoking one single phase of European architecture, but it's blending that late modern styles of different eras together, giving that sense of history, and you see a very continental style. The streets are also interesting because of their bridges and their raised walkways and steps, suggesting that either flooding was a risk and there are no ground level windows, or these are defence against particular threats of other Ghorman. It reflects past conflict, or perhaps the bugs, as I mentioned, but it's never fully explained. But you have this distinctively alien architecture that evokes European civic architectures, and the central plaza away from these roads therefore does something different again. So here you see the sort of the fronts of the houses. This has been carefully designed to give a sense of variability, of history, with antique elements mixed with modern. And here you have a glimpse of the canals. So it's a city with organised hydraulics, the details of which are never fully explained. So this rich detail, you see the clothing, the trench coats, the boulangerie hats, the kind of the berets. It's all evoking a French / broader Central Europe, Western European aesthetic. And you can see patina on the walls. They put a lot of effort into giving that sense of a worn, deeper history and idiosyncrasies in every building. And I think this kind of detail is to be admired and recognised as something worth building that sense of accreted, cumulative urban architecture behind the storyline. So the central plaza, then, it sits at the centre of the city, the highest point, and it is shown to be a place of hotels, of cafes, and into it the imperial government has installed its domed structure. And also, though, they've allowed the monument, and this is where sort of funerary archaeology plays an important role, because they allow the monument to remain as a marker and a remembrance of a terrible event that we learn transpired when Grand Moff Tarkin tried to land his ship in the square. People tried to populate the square to resist it, and he landed his space cruiser on top of them, killing 500 peaceful unarmed Ghorman that gathered in the plaza. So their attempts at peaceful resistance from the past are remembered with the four-pillared monument, which is also a fountain set in a stepped base circular pond or pool, and frames is the focus of protest. We see children walking past it, we see the strange Ghorman pigeons, and you get a sense of peacetime but with a tension inherent, and the monument is a focus of a sort of a sense of emerging stress as the armoury is built in the background. Sort of the dissonance is rife in the architecture, and so we encounter a landscape which is both peaceful and civic, in which the Tuileries are represented, the Webberies, are represented in, as you saw in the valleys, are also represented in the decorative patterns, the twills and the shape of the Webberies themselves, and the various different twills that go into the fabric are evoked in the architecture. So it's a very naturalistic architecture. And the monument is contrasting with that. It's a dark, sort of rust coloured. It represents breakage and severance. Therefore, it's a modernist style structure. It's not representational. And here we see it as a focus of protest. And of course, this is where the massacre ends up being choreographed by Imperial forces. The architecture of the field office of the Bureau of Standards on Ghorman is shown to be civilian and has pillars similar to the square, the plaza itself. So it does suggest this may be civilian, but inhabited by Ghorman servants to imperial representatives. So you have that sort of mixture and tensions. And at the end of the story, when the Ghorman resistance leads to conflict and massacre. We never see what happens to these spaces and to the fate of Ghorman. We presume it's all destroyed. But what it does, in why this is important in terms of the storyline, is that deep history set up, that sense of pastness set up through material cultures, clothing, landscape, and Palmo's architecture in particular, provides an absolute strong sense of culture, identity, social, economic, political, that is the focus of the pride, the Ghorman pride that underpins the power of the storyline. So without this heavy attempt to reconstruct a quasi-historical pastness, the whole of the resistance of Ghorman would be difficult to understand in the storyline. So that's why I think this is one of the most immersive and powerful uses of archaeology, by which I mean the material sense of pastness constructed for a landscape in a science fiction context. And I think Coruscant and Chandrila do it in a very stark way. Here it's done in a much more immersive and accretive fashion. And so that ends my third set of reflections on the archaeology in Andor Season 2, and next time we'll move on to look at the moon Yavin 4, where of course the Rebel Alliance's base is seen to be developing. I hope this was of interest, and you can find further details on my Archaeodeath blog.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.